Hello and welcome to Wellness Live. My name is Dr. Olivia Moses, and this broadcast is brought to you by Loma Linda University Health's Living Whole Wellness Program. Well, we're so excited you joined us tonight, and please know that we are here live if you're watching us here tonight, and we would be ecstatic if you would type in your questions because our expert is here to answer your questions. Now, eating. That's the topic of the day. And to many of us, it's the topic of every day. And what should we eat? What should our meals be comprised of? When should we eat? And so that is what we're talking about today. And we have an excellent guest speaker here today, and her name is Dr. April Wilson. She is the chair of our preventive medicine program here at Loma Linda University and a really great friend of mine. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Wilson.
Thank you so much, Olivia. I really appreciate it. I am thrilled to be able to share some of the things that I've learned about meal timing, how to optimize when we eat so that we can maintain a healthy weight and avoid chronic disease. And our objectives for this evening are to discuss which meals are most important, to prioritize when to eat each meal in a typical day, to distinguish between the benefits and the risks of the different types of fasting, a very popular topic right now, and to identify practical tips and guidelines for nutrition related to meal timing. So does this look familiar to you? Probably not for most of us. Most of us eat here, or here, or here. And I don't know if you can see, but all the people in this picture have cell phones. So they're sitting in a restaurant, eating together, looking at their cell phones. When I was a resident, Olivia, I carried granola bars in my pockets at all times because I never knew when I was going to have a moment to eat. And I figured I have to be prepared. I can pull one out and eat whether it's 8 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, or 2 a.m. And we can see that this type of behavior has really become very typical in our society. We have shifted away from 3 formal sit-down meals per day to where we're now getting a larger and larger proportion of our calories from snacking. In the 1970s, it was 18% of our calories in a given day, now up to 23%. So this is quite significant. In addition, we have no meal patterns. This is the average American who is not a shift worker. So this is not someone whose schedule is changing every day and night, but the average American is eating 4.2 to 10.5 times per day. So that includes all meals, all snacks, all eating occasions. That is quite significant, especially for the people at the high end of the spectrum who are eating 10.5 times in a given day. In fact, the only time that it is rare for people to eat is between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Less than 1% of meeting occasions happen during this specific window of time. In fact, one restaurant has even encouraged this trend. Have you heard of fourth meal? That's Taco Bell. Taco Bell has dubbed fourth meal as the meal in between dinner and breakfast, encouraging individuals to eat late in the day. So maybe this isn't really a problem. Some have suggested that frequent snacking, multiple small meals might be helpful for weight loss. So let's look at that evidence and see if this is indeed true. If multiple small meals are protective for our weight and our waistlines, it would seem that this trend of increasing snacking and increasing number of meals would be associated with weight loss over time. Unfortunately, our practical experience and the scientific literature both show that that particular trend has not happened. Americans are gaining weight at an unprecedented rate. And why is this? There's probably many reasons, but one specific reason is that we are not good at monitoring our caloric intake. See this chip in the picture? Guess how many calories is in that one chip? Typically right around 15 calories. Now, if you're eating 3 times a day and you have 1 extra chip at each meal, just 1, then you have consumed 45 extra calories in a day. But if you're eating 6 times or 10 times in a day, that could add up really, really quickly. And if we're eating unconsciously, just eating at whatever time of day or night without really thinking about it, it is even more likely that we're going to consume more calories than is ideal. And this will put us on a path toward additional weight gain. What we do know is that intentional strategies for weight loss are beneficial. Even something as simple as keeping a food diary where you write down what you ate in a day can help. So, if you approach eating multiple small meals in an intentional manner, planning out those meals, planning when you're going to eat them, so that you are reducing your overall caloric intake, it can be beneficial for weight loss, but it is not superior to other approaches. We'll talk more about those other approaches as we move on. In one study that was done right here at Loma Linda University Health, the Adventist Health Study research team asked a question about weight loss over time. They said, how many times do people eat in a day, and then how does their weight change over time? And they looked at that in a large population to see what would happen with their body mass index. Now, body mass index is a very medical term, and it's how we measure someone's weight for their height. How tall are you? How much do you weigh for your height? And a lower number is better, so that your weight is lower for your height. So let's orient ourselves just a little bit with this figure. It's going to be very similar to other figures we're going to look at as we move on. This red line in the middle is what we call kind of our neutral line. Things below this red line have decreasing BMI or decreasing risk of weight gain over time. Things above the line have increasing weight gain over time. So let's look at the people who are eating 1 to 2 meals a day. We see them here below the line, decreased risk. Their BMI is actually going to improve as time goes on. So that's interesting. The neutral line is actually set at the 3 meals per day. So those who are eating 3 meals a day, their BMI is not going up, their BMI is not going down, they're staying steady over time. Now, what about those over in this far corner who are eating 6 or more meals per day? That's a lot. And in my mind, this likely represents a shift towards more snacking behavior, where you're eating more meals, smaller meals throughout the day. And unfortunately, when we snack, we tend to not eat real food. That's the time when we give ourselves permission to eat junk food, if you will. Times when we say, I don't need to have fruits and vegetables, that's rarely what we think of as a snack. It tends to be our cheating time. So my tip in this particular area related to number of meals is no matter how often you eat, think of every eating occasion as a meal and eat real food.
Thank you, April. That's great information. So we have some questions coming in, and some of them are really good. So let's get to it. The first one is, what is a healthy diet anyway?
What is a healthy diet anyway? I think there have been thousands of research articles written on this topic, but it is very confusing, and the media wants to promote that confusion. I think the things that we see in common in terms of a healthy diet are foods that are not processed and reducing animal products significantly. So if you want to put it in the positive, it's eating a lot of plants as close to how they're grown as possible. Shopping around those outer edges of the grocery store, if you will, so that you're getting more of the fruits and the vegetables, the whole grains. I have a friend who says you make it an M because you can come into the middle aisle and get some of the whole grains and the beans. Okay, but avoiding those aisles that have all the chips and processed foods, as well as the ice cream and the pizzas and all of those things.
Great. Can I add one more thing? And
Sure.
add color.
And add color, yes. Don't just buy the potatoes and the corn when you shop around those edges of the store. I think that's an excellent point, because that's where the food has the phytochemicals that actually treat and reverse disease.
Not only is it really good for you, it's also pretty.
It is
and
very
then
pretty.
you want to eat it.
That is so true.
So another question is 3 meals a day or smaller meals? And you kind of answered it here. So another kind of to piggyback on this question, a lot of times people have questions is, do we need snacks? Are snacks completely bad for you?
That's a challenging question. In general, and we're going to get into this more as we move on, but in general, snacks do not seem to be beneficial unless you have planned them out as part of an intentional strategy. And even then, I would say we need to be careful, because the more times we eat per day, the more the weight tends to change in a increasing, going up direction over time. Our waistlines are going to get bigger. Right. So from that perspective, that concerns me a bit. So I would encourage people to try to minimize the number of meals per day. And we see some benefits for chronic disease in terms of that as well. And we'll look at some of that as we move on to some of the other slides.
Perfect. Let's get to another question. So how many times a day, this is kind of reviewing your slides, how many times a day should I be eating?
This is coming later.
Yeah, okay.
But I'll make the quick answer. 2. That's
2.
I think 2 meals is about perfect for most people. 3 if you tend to lose too much weight with 2 meals a day. Right now, that's not the problem for the average American.
Okay. And then one more question. I am on a diet to lose weight. Do I still need to exercise?
No matter what's happening, we need to exercise.
Yes.
Exercise has benefits, and one of the most compelling things for me, I'll be honest, exercise is one of the things that's more of a struggle for me. So it's easier for me to make choices to eat healthier, harder for me to exercise. And so I'm constantly working on improving that, putting systems in place in my life so that I can make it easy to exercise, make it not so hard. But if you look at a thin person who doesn't exercise and a very overweight or obese person who does exercise, it's fascinating. Their risk of mortality, their risk of dying is essentially similar. And maybe even the thin person has a slightly increased risk. So basically think of those as similar. So exercise is incredibly protective for every system of our body.
Yeah, and there's no getting around it.
Unfortunately, there's not.
There's no getting around it.
No.
Okay, well, let's go
I tried.
Let's go to the second half.
All right, let's look at what's coming up next. So Adele Davis made this famous statement that many of you may have heard: eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. So do we think that's true? Was she correct when she made this statement? We did not have all the evidence that we currently have about it. It may have been a well-informed guess. Let's talk about what each of these meals is, how we define them. And that might seem obvious for those of us who eat a regular breakfast, eat a regular 3 meals a day, but it's not necessarily obvious for the rest of the world. So breakfast can be defined as the first meal of the day, eaten within 2 hours of waking up, and that's typically between 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. Lunch and dinner, much more difficult to define. The American Heart Association says anytime you eat more than 210 calories, we should call that maybe lunch or dinner. It's obviously not breakfast. And I think that one of the ways that that I think about this is different cultures. So probably at the most extreme example would be the culture in Europe, in Spain, where lunch may be much later in the afternoon, and then they have dinner. Typical dinner time starts around 8, 9, 10 p.m. And so every culture is a little different, and that's why it makes it difficult to define this. I think as Americans, we actually have more standard expectations for what lunch and dinner is than the rest of the world. So is breakfast the most important meal of the day, like our moms taught us when we were rushing out of the door in elementary school or high school? Well, let's look at the evidence. Here we have the red neutral line, and those who are friends who are not eating breakfast sit right on this line. So their BMI, their body mass index, their weight for their height, is not changing over time. It's stable. So I guess that's good news. But here's the better news for the rest of us who do eat breakfast. We can see that although our friends are up here, we are down here, having a relative change of improvement in BMI over time based on the category of eating breakfast. So I've been a fairly regular breakfast eater except for a brief hiatus in college, and this made me thankful that I've been doing it all along. So in addition, there are some specific risks to skipping breakfast. So we know that there's the benefit of having a lower BMI, but those who skip breakfast do not get as much vitamins and minerals throughout their day. Those who skip breakfast only get 41% of their vitamin and mineral intake versus 74% who do eat breakfast. They get a much larger percentage of those vitamins and minerals that they need. It also is associated with a higher blood sugar, which increases the risk for type 2 diabetes. And it increases the risk for high blood pressure and high cholesterol. And as we all know, those are then associated with increased risk of heart attack and stroke. So the simple tip for this one, eat breakfast. It's good for you and good for your waistline. But what meal should be the largest? That's one of the questions I frequently get from my patients after I've just told them the evidence that they should eat breakfast, but they say, but I hate breakfast. So should I eat, can I just have a cup of coffee and one egg? Or can I have a small bowl of oatmeal? Can I just eat the smallest amount of food possible for breakfast and then move on and have larger meals later in the day? Well, we are all free agents. You can do what you want, but here's the evidence. Those who have breakfast, you can see on the far side over here, the lowest circle are those who make breakfast the largest meal of the day. Having lunch as the largest meal is also protective, but dinner as the largest meal should be avoided at all costs. So if you're not naturally a breakfast-friendly person, you could maybe make that meal a little bit smaller, make lunch a larger meal, and then minimize breakfast. But regardless, dinner should be quite small. There's additional risks for this if dinner is the largest meal, and it has been associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, and that's very concerning. So my tip is, if possible, if it works with your rest of your life, you're able to do it, make breakfast your largest meal, lunch slightly smaller, dinner a bit smaller yet. And no discussion on this topic would be complete without addressing intermittent fasting, which is one of the most popular topics in nutrition and weight loss science currently in our American culture. So there's actually 3 types of intermittent fasting. Most people are not aware of that fact. So we'll talk about each of them and a little bit about the science behind each of them. First is alternate day fasting. This is where you feast one day, fast the next day. Feast one day, fast the next day. You keep alternating every other day, feasting or fasting. Periodic fasting has kind of 2 different patterns. You can have what is known as a 5-2 pattern. You may see that in the literature, where you feast for several days. You have 2 fast days consecutively, and then you continue to feast. Or you could have non-consecutive fasting days interspersed among those feasting days where you have a shorter length of fasting. Now on to the one that most people think of when they think of intermittent fasting. This is called actually time-restricted feeding. And you may have a friend who says, I eat in a window of time. I do intermittent fasting. This is what they're talking about, that they have a time-restricted window when they eat, and they don't eat for the whole rest of the day. Typically, these windows can be as small as 4 hours or as large as 12 hours. So let's back up a little bit and talk about the alternate day periodic fasting approach and the evidence around that, and then we will come back to the time-restricted feeding. With alternate day fasting, those who are successful on this dietary, who are not successful on this dietary approach, tend to have a problem with overeating on their feast days, or they eat unhealthy food and more calories on their fast days because they're not closely monitoring their intake. As long as they don't do that, if they feast and just eat a normal amount of food, there's not any typical guidelines for this, but they eat maybe the typical amount for a day or just a tiny bit more, And then on their fast days, they can have between 0 and 100 calories, depending on the type of feast fasts that they choose. This, on average, reduces caloric intake by about 25%. So you can see that over time, someone could reduce their calories every day by 25%, or they could reduce their calories every other day more significantly. The average is about the same, and the outcomes for weight loss are very similar. Over 12 weeks, people tend to lose, in most studies, between 4 and 8% of their weight. This is associated with lower blood pressure, lower triglycerides. However, in some studies, the cholesterol has not improved. And so we would encourage you, if this is an attractive pattern, to keep an eye on your cholesterol and see if your cholesterol does go down, if that's one of your laboratory values or risks that you are following. In addition, this is probably not an ideal plan for diabetics or those who struggle with blood sugar control, because the risk of hypoglycemia is real, especially if they do the 5-2 pattern where they have a 48-hour window of fasting. So if you want to follow this pattern, I would highly recommend that you discuss it with your healthcare provider if you have any health conditions, especially if you're going to do the 5-2 pattern, and monitor yourself for hypoglycemia, see how you feel. And you know, some patients say that they find this particular pattern really difficult in the beginning, but then after 1 to 2 weeks, their hunger cues begin to improve as their body adapts to the pattern, and it becomes easier to follow the diet. So this is probably less popular, but can be an effective tool for weight loss, but probably not superior to what we typically think of, where patients are just focusing on reducing calories every day by a specific amount. So the take-home point for this is, if you want to have feast days and fast days, we need to make sure that our choices are healthy on both of those days in terms of how much calories we take in and how the quality of those calories on each of those days, so that we're not eating junk food on our fast days because it's the freebie day, and so we're eating 500 calories of cookies. That would be not a wise choice and doesn't help support the improvement in chronic disease risk overall. What about time-restricted feeding? So now back to this popular one. Intermittent fasting, as we typically think of it, time-restricted feeding, and the window. So there's kind of two things that we need to think about when we think about the window. The length of the window is important, and the timing of the window in a given day is important. When we think about the timing of the window, an early window seems to be superior to a late window. So we see improvements if your window is from morning to afternoon in BMI, in blood pressure, in blood sugar, and in cholesterol. We're not sure all the mechanisms why this works, but we think some of them may include that we tend to eat more calories later in the day. That risk of having the large dinner. We also tend to eat more unhealthy foods later in the day. So by having that early window, we avoid some of those temptations or inclinations, if you will, that come with food that we might give ourselves as a reward at the end of our day. The other thought process about this window timing is that this correlates well with our natural circadian rhythms. We get up in the morning, we are getting ready to be active for our day, so we eat our food, and then we have all day to burn that energy. And so that aligns better with our circadian rhythms or our sleep-wake cycles. What if the window is late in the day? I have a lot of friends who prefer this particular method because it's nice to go home in the evening and have dinner with your family. And so there's some social cues that seem to work better with a late window of time-restricted feeding. Well, unfortunately, even though in the studies that we've looked at, the BMI tends to decrease, unfortunately, the blood pressure and the cholesterol has a tendency to go up in these situations. And so because of that, I would recommend avoiding this particular pattern, and at a minimum, monitoring your blood pressure and cholesterol and seeing if it's being negatively impacted if you do have a late window in the day. And this kind of makes sense, again, with the whole circadian rhythm idea that you wake up in the morning, you work throughout the day, you burn all those calories, and then you eat and go to sleep. It's a little more biologically aligned to eat early in the day, burn the calories, and then go to sleep once our stomachs are empty and our whole body can rest overnight. So, as much as possible, it's preferred to plan a window for eating that's as early in the day as possible, that you can do consistently, so that you're not switching from one thing, one plan one day to another plan the next day, early window, late window. Plan a consistent window, but as early in the day as possible will be better for your overall health from what we're able to see in the current literature. What about the time in between meals? We know it's better to eat less frequently, as we saw in some of the earlier slides, and to have larger meals at the end of the day, but how much time do we need in between those meals? It does seem like it's best to have a bit longer rest period for our guts in between those meals. 5 to 6 hours is associated with the body mass index, the BMI, improving over time. And we see that on this side of this particular figure. Whereas on the far side of the figure, we see those whose window of overnight fasting is only 7 to 11 hours. So these may be the people who are the ones that are not eating between the 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. and they're having the fourth meal at Taco Bell. And it's natural for us to sometimes have those late night munchies, but it does seem to be associated with increasing BMI over time. So 12 hours overnight fast seems to be a minimum for health benefits. 14 hours is ideal, but you can continue to get more benefit if you go up to 18 hours for that overnight fast. So that would be a very short window in the daytime of eating, and then 18 hours overnight where you are not consuming any calories. And for those in the ideal and longer windows, 14 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours, we see benefits for cardiovascular disease and even cancer recurrence. Specifically, breast cancer recurrence was found to be much lower in women who went 13 to 14 hours or more between their evening meal and their breakfast meal. So this is actually what I personally do myself. As much as possible, I try to eat breakfast where you see those yellow circles on the screen. I try to have my breakfast around 7:30, and then I try to have my lunch between 1 and 2 p.m. I push it off a little bit. I eat a healthy, filling, significant breakfast. It's a really big bowl of oatmeal with nuts and fruits and lots of good things, seeds. And when I eat something that's not processed, I actually do not find it that difficult to last until the early afternoon. If I eat more typical cold cereal, I have that sense of needing to eat a little bit sooner. And you may be different, but that's how I feel. So then I'm able to make it until 2 o'clock. I have my lunch in the afternoon. Again, nice big meal. Make sure that I have vegetables, that I have beans, legumes, maybe some nuts, maybe some whole grains. And then I don't eat again until the next morning at 7:30. And I've had amazing results with my patients who followed this meal pattern. Their blood sugars improve, their weight begins to drop, and overall their chronic disease risk factors begin to improve. Now, sometimes I can't do this. Due to social reasons, there's a meal served over noon and I have to eat it, or I know that there's going to be a dinner that I'm going to participate in, and for social reasons I want to engage in that. If that's the case, I maintain the same large breakfast, have a medium lunch, and then try to eat a very, very light dinner. So just kind of have more of hors d'oeuvres for dinner if it's a served meal, and to cut back on those calories a bit. And that has seemed to be helpful. So I would recommend that you aim for at least 14 hours between the last meal of the day and breakfast the next morning for better health outcomes. Next, we did not discuss water-only fasting on the slide about intermittent fasting because it is a slightly different type of fasting, but no conversation about fasting would be complete without talking about this. And I'm going to just touch on it very briefly. The evidence is quite compelling that hypoglycemia risk and also risk for electrolyte imbalances can be significant. Also, if you're doing this for weight loss, within the first 3 weeks, you lose more protein than you lose fat. And that's not what any of us want when we're trying to trim our waistlines. So you have to go beyond that 3-week time period to see the fat loss overtake the protein loss. And that type of a fast should only be done under intense physician supervision. So in general, fasting for more than 1 to 2 days is not recommended for weight loss. So here's a few quick tips. Eat early, including breakfast. Have 2 to 3 meals per day. Maintain a schedule that's as consistent as possible to align with your circadian rhythms, and also so that you're not treating your body to a jet lag experience every single day by changing up your meal cycle. Try to fast at least 14 hours overnight as often as you can, and no snacks. Think of every meal, even if it is a snack, as an opportunity to eat real food with all the bright colors as we've shown in this picture here.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. I'm so excited because we have so many questions coming through. So, yes, so let's get to them. We have a question, and it's really regarding diabetics. So it says, you mentioned that having a break in between meals of 5 to 6 hours is ideal. Is this the case with diabetics as well?
I have seen good results with my diabetics. Now, I do encourage them to monitor their blood sugars throughout that time. The reason it can be beneficial for diabetics and others is it gives our stomach, our gut, our intestines time to rest in between those meals, which then allows our insulin levels to become much lower. And the long overnight fast is also beneficial for that. It lowers the insulin levels, which helps with the diabetes control and also with weight loss, because insulin is a molecule that wants to hold on to all energy.
Right.
Let's hoard it all and store it in our cells. And that's exactly what we don't want it to do. So even for diabetics, it can be beneficial, but monitor, obviously, and particularly if you're insulin dependent, you should talk about it with your doctor. Make sure you're doing it safely.
Okay, great. Another question is here, talking about children. Should children or teenagers be fasting?
That's a good question. I did not dive deep into the literature on children. But what I will say from practical experience and what I have seen in the literature that I have looked at is that I think the long overnight fast is beneficial. Maybe not 18 hours, but making sure it's at least the 12 to 14 hours. So they're not snacking and eating late into the day. That tends to drive up insulin levels, and we do see that our children are gaining weight just as adults are. So that can be beneficial. However, children who are growing and are healthy weight probably need more like 3 meals a day, because we want to maintain their BMI and help them to grow in a healthy way over time.
Right.
My children eat 3 meals a day.
Okay. So, you know, a lot of our viewers who are seeing this and saying, wow, this is really extreme. Because I think a lot of times our society, our work schedule is not really geared to support this kind of eating. So what would your advice be on how you can fit this in and start changing your diet in this way?
Right, and we have many of our employees who may be watching this particular session who are constrained by their ER shift, by their nursing shift. It's not guaranteed when you're going to get to eat. So I would just say we have to do our best, right? We can try to do our best, and if the 3-meal pattern is easier, then really try to stick to the larger breakfast, the lunch that's a little bit smaller but still substantive, and then as small of a dinner as possible. And then whenever your night is, if you're a night shift worker, try to have that fast be longer so that you're not eating constantly. Give your body time to break. Some of us who are healthcare professionals do make the choice to give up our sleep and to change our rhythms because it's what we've chosen as a profession. And we can't get away from that. That risk will still be there, but we can do what we can to minimize it. And having more time in between meals, not eating constantly, will be helpful.
Right. So another question here on the timing of meals, because I think we, as you mentioned in the research, we eat often. Yes. So I think we've also lost, we don't really know what it is sometimes to feel a sensation of hunger versus our appetite and those kinds of things. So probably when you're trying to change your diet into these things, hunger or whatever you want to call it
Yes.
is a very strong feeling,
Yes.
sensation.
Cue.
How do you get past that hump?
Right.
How do you deal with
Right.
that
Yes.
feeling?
I'll speak from my own personal experience, and that is when I'm doing the 2 meals a day, by the time it gets to 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, I have those just clock-based cues that it's lunchtime. I feel like I should eat. And if I think about, like, how does my stomach feel? Well, it feels kind of empty, but it's not growling. It's not painful. I don't feel shaky or anything like that. And I'm like, well, I could wait a little bit longer, I think. So as I've monitored, or if I'm distracted, if we're in a meeting together and it's over lunchtime, I might forget that I needed to eat. I'm not miserable. However, I have found that for myself, consistently, if I go to past 3:30, if something happens in my schedule, and it does probably once a week, that I intended to eat at 1 or 2 o'clock, didn't make it, and then by 3:30 or 4, I am so hungry. I start to feel shaky. It's probably, I haven't measured it, but it's probably associated with my blood sugar dropping a bit. I'm ready to eat. And then I make unhealthy food choices because I'm ready to just eat anything. I'm hangry.
Right.
So I try to make my plan to create a system that makes it easy to avoid that. And do I do it perfectly? No. But I just keep trying. I keep looking at what's the barriers, how can I problem solve, and put together a better system so that I can do it on a regular basis as best as I can.
So a couple take-home messages to what you said is, number one, no one's perfect, but to,
Including me.
but to try to get more days than not,
Right.
that are working
exactly.
out for you.
Yes, yes.
You also talked about planning. To do this kind of meal schedule, planning is important. So any
Correct.
tips on the planning piece?
Correct. So if you have the flexibility in your schedule to take your lunch when you want to take it, block an hour in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. Eat your lunch, and if you can, go for a walk. So an after meal walk is fabulous for taking up all of that energy into our cells, and it doesn't require insulin to do that. So that's actually fabulous. When our skeletal muscle moves, it takes it all up, and then we don't have to release the insulin, and that helps with our diabetic control. It helps with the weight loss. So I recommend that as well to my patients.
Right.
Different topic entirely, but if you're able to block out that time, that's really good. If you can't, then you have to make the concessions, like
Right.
I mentioned earlier. But knowing that you have a go-to thing that you're going to either pack or take with you, or that you have a plan of, I can go to this restaurant and get this specific food that I know is going to meet my goals for today, is really, really beneficial. So I have like a go-to place. And I've actually begun to think more about more simplicity. So instead of feeling like I have to have this really elaborate meal and that it's not real food unless I have this elaborate meal, I've been trying to think more simple. So how can I have more vegetables, more fruit? And that doesn't have to be, created into some amazing, souffle or bake, but like just saute them, roast them, boil them, steam them, and eat some vegetables and have some beans. And so making it more simple actually helps from a prep perspective tremendously. And then I try to prep my breakfasts either a week in advance or the night before. And so then I stick them in the freezer and just pull them out the day before. And because I am not a morning person, so that's always a good one for me to take on the go.
So preparation is really important.
Yeah.
So one last question before we leave, and I could talk to you about this all day. This is a great topic.
I don't know if I have enough answers for all day.
Is that, a lot of times our culture says in the evening is when you get to relax, you get to spend time with your family around a large meal. It's, in a lot of senses, it's our favorite time of day. And it's really based around food. So if you have children, if you have a spouse, if that's where it is for you, how do you start shifting that?
That is a challenge. And honestly, it's something that I'm working on right now. I've been shifting more and more toward the 2 meal a day pattern. I've been doing it on and off for over a year, but pretty consistently for the last few months. And it's hard in the evening when I go home and the rest of the family is sitting down to dinner, and I'm not eating dinner. So I don't know if this is the magic bullet or not, but what I have been doing the last few weeks is I don't sit with them, but I stand and I start prepping lunches and breakfasts for the next day. So I can talk to them, but it keeps my hands and my mind busy so that I'm not sitting there thinking about, oh, this lovely meal of sweet potato and chickpeas or mashed potatoes and broccoli that I'm not partaking in.
Right.
But they can enjoy it, and we can have social time and talk about our day. So that's one thing that I have done. And then I think just exploring for your family what things you enjoy. What are other things that you enjoy in the evening? Do you enjoy going on a walk together? Do you enjoy, my kids are in music, so you know, practicing music and being part of that with them, listening to that, so that you can try to fill that time with other meaningful traditions. But you're right, it is a real felt need, experience, and if that's hard for you, it's not a matter of willpower, right? This is something that's difficult, and so building new systems and processes and trying them and failing and trying something new and failing again and just continuing to work and say, well, that kind of worked, how can I shape it, is really what leads to ultimate success. And just looking at it as, I'm just going to problem solve. I'm going to keep problem solving until I figure out something that works for me.
And I think what you said is just a great conclusion statement. This is not about willpower. It's really a lot. Some of it's willpower in deciding, but a lot of it is system changing.
Creating the systems that work for you to make it easy to make that healthy choice that you want to make.
Right. Thank you so much for being
You're
here.
welcome. My pleasure.
This has been great. And I want to thank you for being here as well, joining us for Wellness Live. And what's really exciting, we have one more Wellness Live for the year, and we have I'm going to back up. We have a great year-end talk for you, and we have Dr. Randy Roberts here, who is going to talk to you about not everyone has a great Christmas, and what happens if you are grieving during the holidays. So this is a really important topic and might be affecting you too, as how am I going to get through these holidays? So please, I would invite you to join us in Wellness Live. My name is Dr. Olivia Moses. Thank you for joining us.